Ghosts of the Hunley from the Beginning is a new book written by author and genealogist Cheryl Oliver that delves more into the men behind the H.L. Hunley submarine. Today, I talk one-on-one with Cheryl about this new book for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Cheryl Oliver, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you.
I know that you are an author with a new book out, which was obviously out in time for Veterans Day, which delves more into the men behind the H.L. Hunley submarine than previous books about the historic submarine. Professional genealogist Cheryl Oliver of Somerville did extensive research from the past 7 years for your ninth book, Ghosts of the Hunley from the Beginning, which is now available in paperback on Amazon.com. Let me ask you this, Ms. Cheryl, as I'm reading from your press release here. What's the biggest difference about the story told about these men?
The biggest story about these men?
The biggest difference about the story told about these men?
The biggest difference is I have done a lot of research. I have traveled to all the different states that these men were from. I found out their family backgrounds, where they came from, who they were. I wanted to know the people, not just the fact that they worked on the sub, but I wanted to tell their story. They deserve recognition for what they did. And a lot of these men, some of them had just come over from overseas. Others were from the New Orleans and Mobile, Alabama area. And a lot of people don't understand that that area was new to the United States. It wasn't always part of the United States. They were like the baby of the country. And when they came into the country, they had a mix of Spanish, Indian, colored, white, and it didn't matter who married who. You could marry anyone. They had a free civilization, even more free than what we have today, if you think of things that were happening back then. But they came into our country, and all of a sudden, with the Louisiana Purchase, and all of a sudden they were told, no, you can't marry someone outside your race. No, you can't do this. You can't do that. So they were already upset with the Union because their rights were being taken away. And then when the war broke out, they were even more furious because it was their land. Excuse me, it was their land. And now they were trying to take it away because it was a major shipping port. So that covers a lot of that area. As far as this area goes, they had said that there weren't any men on any of the subs that were from South Carolina. That is not true. I have found men from South Carolina. One actually was a mix of white, colored, and Indian, which I found very interesting, which you'll be able to read in my second book. All of them have interesting stories.
Yes, ma'am. And Michelle, when you talk about that Union and those men who were trying to, be able to have a life regardless of the restrictions, what other rights did the Union take away from these men that we don't know about today?
Well, the right to interracial marriage, the right to freedom of speech, that even today we don't have the freedom of speech that they had in Louisiana back then. Louisiana was a very free, flamboyant area. They had people that were helping each other, living in different areas to help others. Yes, there was some slavery there on the plantations, but in New Orleans itself, most of the people that lived there were free. There were a lot of free men of color. Matter of fact, I discovered on the very first Pioneer, and I discovered there were two, not just one, but on the very first Pioneer, there were two men of color that had served on there. They had the right to work in any job they wanted. A prime example, when the Irish came over, at that point, they were considered the lowest man on the totem pole, and it was very hard for them to get jobs in this country. And in New Orleans, when they came over, a lot of them found work right away because they were building the new canal to connect the lake to the river,
Right.
and things like that. So people were able to get jobs there that couldn't get jobs anywhere else, which was a big plus for that area.
Wow.
And it helped it to grow and manifest.
And Michelle, how many people in total were able to get jobs down there because of that?
I don't know the exact number, but I know there were quite a few employed due to
Wow.
that.
Wow. And I know that earlier you said in your research that you found out when it comes to the submarine that a couple of people from South Carolina were actually on that submarine. How many people were those in total?
How many from South Carolina?
Yes, ma'am.
There were 3 that I know of.
Okay.
There's a couple of men I'm still researching that,
Wow.
that one of them may have also been, but I
Wow.
know 3 for sure.
Wow. Wow. That is really amazing. And I know according to your press release that it says this: professional genealogist Cheryl Oliver Somerville did extensive research for the past 7 years for her 9th book, Ghosts of the Hunley from the Beginning, available in paperback right now. So what in 7 years did you learn personally that you didn't know before writing this book?
I learned so much, so much that I can't tell you everything, but
Right.
I also discovered I have Lawsons on my father's side,
Wow.
and I discovered that my Lawsons that go back to Virginia
Yes.
are Horace Lawson Hunley's Lawsons. So his mother was my Lawson's sister,
Huh.
which I found very interesting.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
So you never know, it's a small world out there. You never know who you're related to till you search.
Until you search. And I know that Ghosts go further this time as it explores the biographies and genealogies of the men involved with the financing and construction of the submarine and the various crew members in its history. So what were the main components of this particular submarine?
What were they? Say again?
Yes, ma'am. What were the main components of this particular submarine?
Of the submarine? They had tried different ways. They had tried steam. They had tried batteries and other options for the submarine. But they found the best way to get the speed and propulsion that they needed was by crank. They had 8 men in the sub. One was the commander, and the other 7 would push the crank to propel the submarine. And this submarine actually was researched for the building of the Nautilus, which is rather impressive. They used a lot of the same techniques for the Nautilus that were used on the H.L. Hunley.
Wow, amazing. So how long did it truly take them to actually construct this submarine?
The H.L. Hunley, they had built one previously, but had lost it because the storm was coming in, the water was rough. But this particular one, it took about 3 to 4 months for them to complete. They had started it was February of 63 that the other one had sunk. And then they built this one, and they did test runs during June and July, and August 12th was when it arrived in Charleston, South Carolina.
Oh my, amazing. So who financed the construction of this particular submarine?
This particular one was financed 100% by Horace Lawson Hunley.
Okay.
The previous subs, the American Diver and Pioneer, there had been other gentlemen that had put in like $400 here and there. But the final one, Hunley financed 100% himself. Horace Hunley before the war, he was a lawyer, he was a politician.
Wow.
And had the money to invest in the war.
And how much did he actually invest in that war?
The total number, I'm not sure. I do know, excuse me, I do know that between the last sub and the other two, it was probably over 50,000 because of all that was involved. Because if you think about it, it's not just the materials in the sub itself,
Right.
but in the labor as well.
Yes.
And some of the materials were getting hard to find because, for instance, a lot of the ironworks were up in Pennsylvania and so forth. But they did have some mines in Alabama, which helped a lot.
Wow. So, how many submarines were there in Alabama at that time?
First they did the American Diver, and then they did the H.L. Hunley.
Wow. Wow, that's really amazing. And I know that, Miss Cheryl, you were asked to write a book on this aspect of the submarine's history of the men by Mark Clark, who was the volunteer with H.L. Hunley traveling exhibit, and volunteer Al Couch. Clark said no one had ever written about the men behind the Hunley before. So let me ask you just a blunt, silly question. Why this? Why now?
Well, I wanted to get it published before now, but traveling and doing the research has taken a lot of time. And the lab did research, but they only concentrated on the third crew and not even as much as I've found. There's a lot that I've found that the lab never found. A lot of secrets that will be exposed in my books.
Right.
Now, there are so many men involved, there's no way to get it all in one book.
Right.
It's huge. I mean, huge. So I'm going to have probably 4 or 5 volumes to get all of the men, all the crews, and everyone done. But there are some really fantastic stories about these men, not just the ones that died on the sub, but the ones that survived, like Charles Hasker and McClintock, who was the engineer. He had an amazing story after the war. Charles Hasker, I don't know how many people know, but after he survived the sinking on August 29th, he went on to help with the evacuation on Morris Island and ended up being taken prisoner. So I've got his story after that as well. There's a lot of interesting stories to tell. Dawson was the youngest of all the men that were working on the submarine, and he went on to build submarines later in life for the United States government. So there's a lot of men that you don't know the stories about, and you probably would like to know.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. And for those who don't know, Miss Cheryl, can you recap how many of those men actually died and how many of those gentlemen actually survived?
Okay, on the first crew, there were 8 men on the crew. The first crew, there were 3 that survived, and that was Hasker, Payne, and Robinson. Those 3 survived. The other 5 passed away. On the second crew, it was 8, and the third crew, it was 8.
Wow.
Now, one thing I'm looking into, I've found some witness stories of other sinkings, and I'm trying to verify those. But it's kind of difficult because of the way that Charleston handled the graves there.
Oh.
There were a whole bunch of graves, but the tombstones were removed, but the bodies were remained, and a lot of them are under the Haygood Stadium today.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so trying to find records of all these people is very hard because during the war, records were sent west to protect them. And then when Sherman came through, the West got attacked instead of Charleston. They thought Charleston was going to be attacked. So a lot of the records were destroyed. So trying to find out who was where and who was buried and who wasn't, it's a little difficult in the Charleston area.
Yes, ma'am.
But I'm trying to verify some of that information. But I also found documentation where you read that there were 8 men, and then you read there were 9 men, and there's this controversy going on. Well, I found some information where it may have been 9 men in the beginning, and then they changed the submarine so it was only 8 men because possibly it was too crowded, or possibly they needed to put other equipment in there. But I'm trying to verify that information that I found to see if that is fact.
And Miss Cheryl, do you know right now what other equipment they may have put on that submarine?
I'm not sure. It could have been like an odometer or some kind of additional breathing apparatus or something to help with the steering or the balance of the sub. I know when they were in Mobile, they did at one point have a problem with the submarine rolling over, so they were able to fix that with the ballast. I'm not sure what it was, but it looks like they did some kind of mechanical change that may have caused the reason for people to think there were 9 men instead of 8. But the sinkings that we know it was 8 men on the subs, and the first one, 3 were able to get away.
And I know you probably don't know this either, Miss Cheryl, but do you know exactly when that mechanical change happened?
It had to have been between the 12th of August and the 29th of August.
Wow.
There's a lot of information I've found between those dates of possible sinkings that, again, I'm trying to verify. And I need evidence of people, names, and so forth to verify this. But during that time, I do know for fact, because it's documented by the military, that at one point McClintock Watson had gone out with their crew in the sub, the first crew from Mobile.
Yes, ma'am.
And while they were out, some kind of incident happened. The military attaché was waiting at the beach for them to return, and it was in the very early morning, like 1 or 2 in the morning, when McClintock came walking out of the water, and that is actually documented.
Wow.
But nothing else was said, so I'm trying to find more information.
Yes, ma'am. And I was just over by the Johnson Hager Stadium just yesterday by Publix, so yeah, that's very interesting information there for sure. And speaking of the guy you just mentioned, what notable locations in Charleston are people seeing ghosts walking along the shore, or even along the water for that matter?
Well, there's different locations that could happen pertaining to the sub or just pertaining to the war in general. I mean, they've been seen on Morris Island.
Wow.
near the area of the lighthouse, because so many had died there, like the Union troops, the colored troops that so many died, that people have seen them walking around there. That was so sad that so many just died right there. On Sullivan's Island, there have been witnesses there over near the fort, because that fort was used during the war.
Right.
So people have seen them over there. Now, Horace Hunley, when his submarine went down, it was right there, where the aquarium is.
Yes, ma'am. I was just there running by there yesterday. That's right.
Where the aquarium is at the end of the war is where they burned the ships, the Indian Chief, the Palmetto, the Chicora, so that the Union would not get them. And people say that in that area they have seen ghosts walking around. So, there's numerous places.
Wow. And going back to the situation with Johnson Hager Stadium and obviously the burials and whatnot, how many of those burials were removed, and what else do you know right now to be true?
Well, I do know the only ones that were removed were the ones inside the stone fence that was around the sailors' graves. And they removed from there the first crew of the Hunley submarine, as well as 27 unknown soldiers, sailors. Now, they know they were sailors because it was the sailors' graveyard. The monument that was in the middle of the grave was also moved, and all of this was moved to Magnolia Cemetery. And the monument is there today, and the unknown graves are there today. And the reason they're marked unknown is when they went to move the graves from the sailors' cemetery, they said that the stones were breaking and falling apart, and a lot of them unreadable.
Wow. This is a lot of great information. And oh my God, I know that you have a couple of more volumes to come. So, I mean, this is amazing information. I just thank you so much for sharing this with the audience. I mean, I really do appreciate this.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Cheryl.
I didn't know if you wanted me to show.
Oh, yes, please do. Please do.
Yeah, so that people know what the book looks like. But yes. It's a thick book, good size, and there's pictures in there. They're not huge because my editor wanted to keep the book within a certain amount of pages, but I do have a website where you can go and see the documents. I'm posting them. Each day I post a new document, but I wanted to show people, yes, I do have the documentation to back up what I say.
Yes, you do.
And that site is the H.L. Hunley and the cruise. So they can look that up as well to and ask to be accepted into the website, and then they can follow along as well.
And since 2023 is coming up, what else can we expect from you in this particular book?
Well, the second volume will be coming out the first quarter of 2023. And that one will cover McClintock and Lawson and start getting into the crew members themselves. The first book, over half the book is the life story of Horace Lawson Hunley, and then it goes into the people that helped him get started with his idea of the submarine. Some people say it was McClintock that came up with the idea. No, I have a copy of his diary, and in 1857, he had written in there that he was meeting with someone to talk to them about his drawing for a submersible. So he was thinking about it back in 57. He didn't wait for the war. This was something he had planned on for a hobby, and it just ended up being for the war.
Right. So, Michelle, do you know if any other of those people actually kept diaries as well?
There were some that kept diaries. I have been in touch with a lot of descendants and interviewed a lot of the descendants, and it's very interesting. There's one from the Watson line that will later be coming out. Wow. Information from his diary, where I got information about the two men of color that were in the first Pioneer.
Wow.
So you'll want to read the story to find out what happened there.
Yes, ma'am. And I want to get you back on Quintin's Close-Ups, hopefully in February or March, so we can talk about the second book as well. But
absolutely.
Oh, yes, indeed. But for right now, author and genealogist Cheryl Oliver, thank you for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. Make sure you send me the link.
I definitely will. Thank you.
Thank you.